You are listening to PR Radio Station of America.
In late December 2008, residents of Rusk County in East Texas learned of a crime so horrific that even hardened investigators struggled to put it into words. Blaine Milam, only 18 at the time, was accused of brutally killing his girlfriend's 13-month-old daughter, Amora Carson. The case began with a 911 call and quickly spiraled into one of the most infamous murder trials in the state's history. When police arrived at Milam's trailer home, they were met with a scene that suggested prolonged violence. Authorities said the child's body bore marks of torture lasting nearly 30 hours. The medical examiner later described Amora's injuries as catastrophic: fractured skull, broken ribs and limbs, bite wounds, and signs of strangulation. The brutality shocked even veteran forensic experts. From the start, Milam and his girlfriend Jesseca Carson claimed the incident was not an act of cruelty, but an attempt to drive out a demon they believed was inside the baby. They used the word exorcism to justify what prosecutors would later describe as deliberate torture. This explanation only deepened the public's horror, raising questions about faith, delusion, and accountability. The child's injuries were so extensive that the forensic pathologist testified he could not single out one cause of death. Each wound, whether the blows from a hammer, the bites, or the strangulation marks, could have been fatal on its own. The sheer number of injuries painted a picture of relentless and calculated violence rather than a momentary loss of control. The story quickly captured headlines across Texas. Reporters noted that both accused were barely adults themselves, yet the crime's severity made prosecutors adamant about pursuing the harshest penalties. Early investigations suggested attempts to hide evidence, strengthening the case against Milam and Carson. From the beginning, it was clear this would not be treated as anything less than capital murder. The courtroom became the center of national attention as Blaine Milam faced trial. Prosecutors painted him as the driving force behind Amora's death, while the defense attempted to shift blame to Jesseca Carson. Jurors listened to harrowing testimony about the child's suffering and the couple's belief in demonic possession. Witnesses described Carson as deeply troubled. Defense attorneys argued she was the one who believed Amora was possessed and that her religious delusions fueled the violence. They pointed to her history of instability and claimed Milam was following her lead. But prosecutors argued that both shared responsibility and that Milam had directly inflicted fatal injuries. Forensic evidence weighed heavily in the case. Bite mark analysis suggested Milam's teeth matched wounds found on Amora. At the time, this kind of evidence was considered reliable, though years later it would face intense criticism from the scientific community. DNA samples, though contested, also placed Milam in direct connection with the child. Jesseca Carson was tried separately and convicted of capital murder. She received life without parole. Milam, however, faced the death penalty. Prosecutors emphasized the cruelty of the crime, the long duration of the assault, and the betrayal of trust against a child who had no means of defense. The jury returned a death sentence. The trials left the community shaken. Media outlets highlighted the case as one of the most disturbing examples of child abuse in recent memory. Both young defendants became symbols in debates about justice, mental health, and the role of faith as a defense. With Milam sentenced to die, appeals would become his only path to survival. Almost immediately after sentencing, Milam's attorneys began filing appeals. One of their primary targets was the bite mark evidence used at trial. By the mid-2010s, scientific panels had declared bite mark analysis unreliable, citing cases where it had led to wrongful convictions. Milam's lawyers argued this meant his conviction rested on flawed science. They also claimed Milam was intellectually disabled. Under federal law, executing people with significant intellectual disabilities is unconstitutional. Defense teams presented IQ tests and psychological evaluations suggesting he struggled with comprehension and reasoning. Courts, however, repeatedly rejected these arguments, ruling that he did not meet the strict legal standard. The appeals process also revisited DNA findings. While prosecutors insisted samples tied Milam to the crime scene, his attorneys argued contamination and flawed methods. They emphasized that prosecutors had relied heavily on forensic testimony that might not withstand modern scrutiny. State and federal courts reviewed these challenges across multiple years. Despite questions about forensic reliability, judges maintained that even without certain evidence, other elements, such as Milam's behavior after the crime and statements he made to a nurse, supported his conviction. The case became part of a broader debate about forensic science in American courts. Critics pointed out that unreliable methods like bite mark analysis had contributed to wrongful convictions across the country. Supporters of the sentence argued that Milam's guilt was clear regardless of scientific disputes. As the execution date approached in 2025, Milam's lawyers mounted a final push for clemency. They argued before the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles that the death penalty was inappropriate in light of discredited evidence and Milam's intellectual challenges. They emphasized that Carson, equally responsible, had been spared death. The board rejected the clemency request. Appeals to federal courts followed, but judges again ruled against delaying the execution. Each decision reinforced the view that Milam's conviction was legally sound, even if some evidence had later been questioned. His attorneys also sought intervention from the Supreme Court. Their petition argued that Carson's delusions drove the crime and that Milam was wrongly portrayed as the mastermind. They emphasized religious delusion as a factor that the courts had not weighed fairly. Prosecutors countered by pointing to Milam's direct actions, his attempts to conceal evidence, his inconsistent stories, and his confession to a nurse. They argued these elements showed clear culpability. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Milam's case as a tragic example of flawed forensic science leading to a death sentence. Others viewed it as an appropriate response to an unspeakable act of cruelty. With the final appeals exhausted, the path to execution remained open. On the scheduled evening, Blaine Milam was moved to Huntsville Prison, where Texas carries out lethal injections. At 35, he had already spent more than half his life on death row. His lawyers issued statements maintaining his innocence, while prosecutors emphasized the justice owed to Amora. The execution drew attention nationwide. If carried out, it would be the fifth in Texas that year, adding to a national total of 33. Florida had already set records with 12 executions. These figures renewed debates over whether capital punishment should remain in modern America. District Attorney Michael Jimerson, who prosecuted the case, reflected on the crime. He stated that the exorcism claim had always appeared to be a cover for torture. He described the case as one of the most painful of his career, saying the community was forever changed by the brutality against a defenseless infant. Forensic science advocates continued to cite Milam's case in discussions about unreliable evidence. The bite mark testimony became a symbol of how outdated methods can have life-and-death consequences. Whether or not Milam's guilt was in question, experts argued that such evidence should never again be decisive in capital trials. The legacy of the case remains twofold: the memory of Amora Carson, whose short life ended in unimaginable suffering, and the broader questions about justice, forensic science, and the death penalty. While the legal system concluded with Milam's execution, the debates it sparked about fairness and reliability in capital punishment will continue for years to come. This is the end of that story. Now tell me in the comments, what's your story? I'll read out the most interesting ones in the next video. Do not forget to hit a like button and subscribe. See you.